Now back to Just Energy Radio with Dr. Rita Louise.
Hello and welcome back to Just Energy Radio. I'm your host, Dr. Rita Louise, and thank you all for staying tuned to the second hour of the show. This hour we're going to be speaking to Eduard J. Qualls about his new book, Community Capitalism. But before I do, a number of reminders for you. Starting next week, Just Energy Radio is going to be moving to Inception Radio Network. You can get information about their network or listen to the show at www.inceptionradionetwork.com. You can always go to the Just Energy Radio webpage and click the listen button, and it'll take you right to their webpage. I'm very excited about it. Also, I've been talking about my new book, Man-Made, The Chronicles of Our Extraterrestrial Gods. It is in. We have copies. They look beautiful. You need to get one. Anyway, we are offering our pre-release offer till the end of the month, and so we are selling the books with no shipping and handling charge, and the books are going to be autographed by me, which is priceless, and my co-author, Wayne La Liberty. And then just one more week, Paradigm Symposium, Minneapolis, Minnesota. Check it out, ParadigmSymposium.com. It's going to be Eric Von Donigan, Giorgio Zuccolos, Philip Coppins, George Norrie, me. I mean, how can you miss it? Anyway, Just Energy Radio is brought to you by SoulHealer.com and the Institute of Applied Energetics. That's www.appliedenergeticsinstitute.com. So let me bring our guest on the air. Well, let me tell you a little bit about him and then bring him on the air. Okay. Eduard Qualls has a Master's of Science degree in Business Administration, a Bachelor's degree in German and Music, capped by over 30 years of successful productivity within the software industry, specializing in programming, software development, and project management. These activities were greatly enhanced by formal and informal studies in mathematics, Chinese, Japanese, Sanskrit, Hebrew, and Arabic. The late economic downturn has given him the opportunity to put into writing a culmination and aggregation of the insights derived from his academic training, his long-term studies in the humanities, and his observations of the human condition and its development through history. So the author of Community Capitalism, my good friend Ed Qualls. Hey, Ed, how are you doing?
I'm fine. How are you?
I'm great. See, I was going to say something about you, but I knew it would just really embarrass you, so I deterred from it. But it's a nice thing. All right, I'm just going to say it, but I'll just have you laugh because I know you're going to turn red when I say it. But everyone listening, and this is me being really honest, Ed's got to be the smartest person I know on the entire planet. And so, are you ready yet, Ed?
Getting there.
Getting there. But you are, and I'm just letting you know that that's what I think.
Well, thank you.
All right, and I had all these questions written up, and they're missing. Oh, there they go. Okay. So, Ed, one of the things that I do with, new people that I bring onto the show is that I just let them spend a couple of minutes kind of talking about, who they are, where they've come from, why they have decided to write the book or, the topic that we're talking about. And so you have your new book, Community Capitalism, pulling capitalism back from its own abyss. And, what led you to write it? What was in your background that brought you to this place?
Well, it may actually go back to the fact that the first book set that I ever read was the encyclopedia. Growing up in a household that was fairly religious and fairly shut down in that way, I had only about 4 things to read: the morning paper, the Bible, the hymnal, and a 1956 set of World Book encyclopedias. By the start of the 2nd grade, I'd already read all the encyclopedias, and I was heading back to my favorite volumes in it. So very early, I got a wide view of the world. and started seeing interconnected things that a lot of people don't see because they concentrate on the things that are right in front of them, the things that they just heard on the paper or now just read on the internet. Whereas my background in that way has given me the ability to step back and get a broad view of things. And this was supported by the fact that I have been essentially all over the library in my academic studies. The first background was in humanities with French, Spanish, Latin, and that was extended by German, more French, more Spanish, and my studies in music, of course, takes me into another realm, another, how would you say it, ethnic, mental realm. And beyond that, getting into business and seeing how business processes infiltrate and in some ways invigorate all these other parts so that everything is in turn related to each other, that it has given me the ability to see the interconnectedness, the network of effects, causes, and so on. Now, the reason for bringing up this book was that about 4 years ago, I was working for a small company that had been absorbed by a huge company. I had gone from a situation in which I was reporting directly to the Vice President of Development, and the company was small enough that if I needed to, I could just walk into the CEO's office and talk. From there, I went to being so low on the totem pole that I had to move the grass away to see the sky. The problems that I saw in such a huge organization and the fact that American economic life is, whether it's correct or not, is dominated by these huge corporations, started showing me things that all of my background started pulling into a cohesive, this just ain't right response. So I wrote a 14-page bullet list of problems that I saw and things that I thought might help, and sent it out to some friends and said, well, this is a book I can never write because it would embarrass the company I was working for or just might infuriate some of the bureaucracy therein. So it sat on the side until I was laid off by this company, and that produced the opportunity to get all of this together, for me to expound on it, to pull other things that I had seen from the Daily New York Times, to things that I saw in the community, things that I saw on other programs and such as that, to bring into a cohesive book. The biggest thing that I saw was the frustration that American workers, that the common American has with an economic system that seems to be out of their grasp and going farther and farther from their grasp.
Well, let me interject here for a second, and because I agree with you, because it seems like the rich keep getting richer while the poor keep getting poorer. But I just don't understand how we kind of got into the whole mess in the first place.
There are several things that have happened in the past 35 years that have, one might say, derailed the traditional American capitalist system. The economy 35 years ago was really product and service based. people were busy building products or supplying services that were productive services. During the Reagan administration, they took the reins off of the banks and gave them back the ability to enter into speculative ventures. This is an ability that had been taken away from them just after the start of the Great Depression. It was taken away from them at that point because it was known that that ability actually helped cause the Great Depression. So in the Reagan administration, that control was relinquished. And from that point, we've gone from a situation in which finance was originally a support service within commerce. If you looked at business, you look at businesses back then, traditional businesses, and it's all throughout the Western world, they were brick and mortar businesses. They had goods and services that were produced and sold, and that was the focus. But what has happened is that there's so much money has moved over into the financial area that this service, how would one say, finance was once the handmaiden, as it were, of commerce. It was a service that helped commerce go and grow. But now finance is its own sphere. In some ways, it's very much its own whirlpool, because once the money gets sucked into the financial world, what's called the hidden or shadow economy, the money doesn't come back out. And this has grown more and more as the market for derivatives and for playing in the stock market, for all of this adventurism, all of this speculation has grown. It has literally sucked the air out of real commerce, to the point that now, if you review the traditional definition of capitalism, in that capitalism is defined as an economic system in which the means of production of goods and services are owned by the private sector rather than government or any other sector. But the question is, as derived from what has happened, what happens when the private sector throws away the means of production and concentrates solely on gambling games in which financial objects are created with abandon and merely passed back and forth between the companies and individuals without the slightest bit of true productivity?
And let me stop you there, because I always thought that, and like stock prices, I'll just use that as an example, and everything that went on in the stock market was based on what a company made and what they sold and the company's profitability. But it's sounding like that's really not true.
No, it's no longer true. There are two groups of people who are involved in the stock market. One group is the traditional investors. The other group, which has come to dominate it, is the speculators. Investors get into the stock market because they're operating in, as you described it, a traditional ownership frame of mind. What does the company do? What does it produce? How well is it doing in the market? What are its prospects as an ongoing concern? An investor's viewpoint is midterm to long term. The other group, the speculators, are the ones who will trade a lot of stock within several seconds or several minutes. Their point of view has nothing to do with the operations of the company itself. They are operating on what they expect the other speculators in the market to do about the price. When the company sends out an announcement about something, the groups will generally act in opposite ways. For example, when the company I was working for held its layoffs, the stock price actually rose. That's because the speculators thought that other speculators would read that as, oh, they're cutting costs, so their profits will be higher, so the other people will pay more for the stock. So let's bid the stock price up, and see, it's all built on smoke and mirrors and the expectation of other people's expectations. Well, the investors would look at such a decision, having layoffs, and start asking questions. Why are you having to have layoffs? What did you fail at? What are you going to replace this lack of, this curtailing of capability with? Did you get rid of longtime employees who have the greatest amount of knowledge in of the products you need to get out, or the greatest rapport and the largest amount of customer base, of sales experience? You know, exactly what are you doing? So you end up with this disparate situation in which the market today is ruled by speculators. And any time there's something like a layoff, a company's price will rise, stock price will rise. But if, in the point of view of the investors and the point of view of traditional brick-and-mortar capitalism, layoffs are a sign of trouble. So we've got a market that is actually rewarding failure. It's rewarding the creation of bad situations in companies. Because one of the things to bring the company that laid me off up to date, this was about 16 months ago, they actually had another set of layoffs, and they probably have another. And I've spoken to someone in the service department there who said, it doesn't matter if customers come in with complaints because there are no programmers to fix the product here anymore. It's a case where this whirlpool of finance and what is the polite way to state it? It's just a morass.
Spit it out.
It's a situation where people are looking at cash going from pocket to pocket and calling it business when it's actually nothing but trading pieces of paper.
So it's kind of like it's just going around in some whirlpool that really doesn't even have any bearing on what's going on in the company.
Right.
That doesn't even make any sense. Like from a cognitive point of view, it doesn't make any sense.
No, it doesn't. And that's one of the things that I believe is at the core of what's really bothering most Americans, is that their economic system doesn't make sense right now. It, in some ways, we have government leaders who have absolutely no idea what capitalism is about or how to deal with it, or the true position of the United States economy in the world today. Now, one of the presidential candidates went off to Europe and helped make the Europeans think even worse of the Americans by trying to lecture them about what he called their entitlement economies. I'm not sure.
I don't know how anyone in the United States could even make that comment, considering we're the United States.
Yeah, I'm not sure which episode of I Love Lucy he was really working from, but he was speaking from a point of view that is really centered in this self-image that so many Americans have, that the United States is still somehow in the middle of the Eisenhower administration, that the U.S. economy is huge and it dominates the world and we're the best and everything's peachy keen and everything's rosy and just let businesses do what they want to because, they're doing so great. Well, the problem is he didn't realize that the European Union has a bigger economy than we do, and there are several nations within the European Union whose each person in the economy is actually more productive than each person in the American economy. Take their favorite how do I want to say this? The dog they love to beat the most, Sweden. Well, the per capita productivity of the Swedes is, by one metric, 30% higher than that of each person working in the United States, despite the fact that they have the classic welfare state as it is right now. Another metric says that they're 17% under our productivity. So average it out, and we're more or less on the same level. So they're not, obviously something's going good there, or something's going well there. Well, the thing is, in Sweden, businesses don't pay income tax. Now, you tell that to your average Republican, and their jaw will drop. How can they have a government working that businesses don't pay income taxes? Businesses don't pay taxes to the national government. The thing is, the Swedish government is paid for by the people. They don't have a situation where the government, sorry, I'm stepping over myself. They don't have what we have, which is government by corporate bribery.
Well, that's a big topic right there.
Yeah. What you will see.
Go ahead.
What you will see with the Swedish leadership and the government officials is that they take it as a point of honor to have small apartments in downtown Stockholm, because if they had anything bigger, it would just be that much more burden on the people. So if anyone ever wonders why Volvo never left Sweden, why IKEA is definitely not going to leave Sweden, this is why. Because Sweden is actually a great business environment, despite the fact that it is a welfare state. The thing is that because the businesses don't have to worry about national taxation, they can pay more. So it all balances out. And for an American to come in and say, you're not doing it right, is just absolute idiocy. They have their own culture. They have their own situation. They have optimized it for the way they want to live. Don't be a missionary for our form of economic dysfunction in a land where people are already doing the best that they can for their own society. Sorry, I had to preach a little bit.
That's okay. A lot of people, there's what's going on Wall Street, but a lot of people, and I'm going to say, I know this has been going on for a lot longer, but the visibility has really come up on, the big banks and their impact. And I have to tell you this, and I'm going to share this with the listeners. You probably already knew this, but I was just like, wow, that was weird. So I was listening because I listen to audiobooks in my car while I'm making long drives, and I was listening to Jules Verne's Trip to the Moon. And one of the things they were doing was, in order to pay for the construction of the cannon that launched the pre-astronauts to the moon, they were taking contributions from around the world, and the money could be sent to, or was sent to, kind of collection areas in different countries or different geographical areas, and two of them were Rothschild banks. It was in a Jules Verne book. So when is that written? In the mid to late 1800s?
Yeah.
We're talking, that's old money. Really
Right.
old money for them to have a bank. Anyway, So what impact does the banking system, both nationally and maybe even internationally, have on what's going on with our economy here?
The problem with the banks is something that we are feeling the impact of very, very personally. That comes from the fact that back in the Reagan regime, they allowed them to get back into speculative instruments. The situation got worse in the early 1990s when some bankers, having a splurge at a Mexican resort, I believe it was, decided that they could take the mortgages that they were holding and separate the mortgage itself from the risk that was carried by the mortgage. This is important because federal regulations required that they retain a certain amount of cash to cover each of the mortgages they had on file. Well, if they could separate the mortgage from the risk, they could package and sell the risk and attach that regulation to it, and then repackage the mortgages and resell them. And if they had sold them, guess what? They weren't on the books. So they didn't have to keep that cash there. Now, the problem is nobody had to keep the cash. So all of a sudden, these mortgages existed, but there was no safety net. There was no financial safety net. But what developed from there was something called tranching. It's a word that is related to the word trench, and it means when existing financial instruments like mortgages or the things that were derived from the mortgages are spread out on a table, they're analyzed, and then they're gathered into groups by some parameter, whether it's the associated amount of risk or the total amount of the mortgage or the interest rate, or however. When they subdivide them like that, that's called tranching. Well, each of those tranches can be packaged and it can be resold. Well, it's a financial instrument. All financial instruments carry a certain amount of risk. So we can make derivatives from the risk and we can sell the risk. The biggest risk in this situation comes from default. And credit default instruments are a specific kind of derivative that is sold separately from the instruments that it actually applies to. What happened with AIG was that they had done this. They had separated certain classes of assets from the risk of those assets, and apparently not paying attention, they had bought their own risk instruments back. So,
and they're a bunch of dummies too.
Yeah. So when those risk instruments were called and due, they had to find money to patch those up. Well, it came around, and it operated in such a way that they had just dug themselves into a deeper and deeper hole, because the biggest problem that the banks have done is in creating these instruments, or actually I should say creating the market for these instruments. Most of them are traded on what's called the over-the-counter market. However, what happens is when someone has some of these instruments that they want to sell, they will go to one of these banks. The banker will sit there and say, okay, well, I'll see this. Okay, great. Well, I'll call you later. And they leave. So he goes through his Rolodex, to use a very old phrase, and picks out some likely buyers, and then he will call the buyers and say, well, I've got these instruments here, blah, 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 and you can have them for a certain amount of money. And, it'll float amongst them. Well, he'll find a buyer. The thing is, the seller and the buyer never talk to each other. They don't know who the other one is. And that's how a company can end up buying its own garbage.
But in the end, it just sounds like they're all just a bunch of crooks. And wasn't it AIG that got all the bailout money, or a bunch of bailout money?
They were kept from going under completely, yes, and then they were sold off in pieces, as I remember.
Right. But the part that killed me, where I get the crook part, especially with that story, is, they got the bailout money, and then there was all this controversy about, well, should they get their bonuses, their $3 million bonus, because, they got the money now. It's like, no, you all should be fired. If I worked at McDonald's and I, created some big old, I blew the place up, I burned it down, they'd fire my little sorry self. You know? Not give you a $3 million bonus.
Right. The problem is we have been essentially paying our own arsonists.
But I even understand that. I don't understand how business can work that way. I don't understand, through the court of public opinion, how some of these people can keep their jobs, or just not go under scrutiny, public scrutiny.
It feeds back into the fact that we have government by bribery. So those with the money can bribe their way through things. There was a situation here in the area that I'm in the 1980s, again during the Reagan regime, in which a real estate scheme fell apart. The people involved were taken to court. Several of them went to jail, except for the ringleader. Now, the ringleader ended up, before the things had gone to court, made a sizable contribution to the Reagan election campaign, to the point that his wife actually became an ambassador to some tiny country. And he never faced anything. So it's a case of the cynical definition of the golden rule: those who have the gold make the rules. This is an example, going back to the Reagan administration, of how things work. And unfortunately, it's just gotten worse and worse as more money has become concentrated in fewer and fewer people and with fewer and fewer organizations. The other thing that started during the Reagan administration was the oversight of mergers and purchases. Mergers between corporations and purchases of one corporation by another. The oversight of that was weakened and weakened until now it barely exists at all. No one is paying attention to anything that comes close to the establishment of monopolies or trusts or anything like that. This merger mania set in, and that's one of the things that keeps driving the stock market, the speculator market, but it's also something that has happened in the banking industry. From around 2006, we went from between 40 and 50 large regional banks to 7 or 8 now.
I'll take your word for it.
It is astounding, the concentration of banking muscle that has happened, that we don't have large regional banks right now. Texas used to have several large regional banks. And those were all swallowed up when, well, it started when the Texas banking market was open to interstate banks. I forgot what year it was. It's about 12 years ago. And this has gotten worse and worse because of the banking problems. The fact that so many banks got themselves in trouble with bad derivative deals, that they had to be rescued by bigger banks. And if you remember, Bank of America ended up buying, I've forgotten what the largest regional bank, it was, I believe, centered in North Carolina. I'm drawing a blank at the moment. But they absorbed them. Wells Fargo has done the same thing with buying up other questionable, or banks of questionable basis, because without the discipline that was imposed on them by the wisdom that arose in the Roosevelt administration, they just rode their bicycle off the road. And the next thing that happens is somebody with a bigger vehicle has to come along and pick them up and try to patch them together and keep going. The other problem, and it's a problem, it's very hard for me to watch any politicians right now because they are not addressing the system problems that are defining the operational problems. What they're doing is they're talking about the symptoms without addressing the disease. The symptom that they spend a lot of time talking about right now is unemployment. It's less than 8% now, which is a lot better than what the Spanish are facing with their 20%. But anyway, the reason it is such a problem now is that everyone is approaching it with the attitudes and the assumptions and the methodologies that worked before the Reagan administration, but that won't work now because of merger mania. If you remember, around the late 1990s, how many different airlines there were. So if someone was laid off at Eastern Airlines, they could go to Pan Am or Braniff or Alaska Air. There were several companies in that marketplace that could help absorb the out of work of that who had been trained, who were in that industry, and who knew how to work in that industry. The problem now is that if someone is laid off by an airline, where are they going to go? The thing that they are not addressing is the fact that with merger mania, when those jobs are gone, they are gone.
But it also doesn't address the issue of, not even of layoffs. So let's say you have some issues at work. Let's say you were talking about your 14-page bullet list that you created. What if someone in management got that in their hands and they were offended by what you had written and decided to get rid of you, not based on performance, but just based on opinion. You would be basically blackballed from ever finding work again in your industry if there's only one company that can hire you.
Right, or even if there are only 4 or 5. What isn't being addressed is the fact that when these jobs disappear, it means that someone who has been trained, who has been operating, whose skill set is tailored to this job, is suddenly back to square one. The only way to get these people back into full employment and get them back into a situation where they have the same level of income is to have a major policy of helping small businesses. The only thing that the country can turn to right now to help us get out of the situation is to emphasize the importance of the small business and the small business operators, the brick and mortar pounding the sidewalk entrepreneur, the ones who have developed products, developed ideas, who are dedicated to getting it out, finding good people to work with, who work with those people. We're in a situation where one of the things I say in the book has come to be an unfortunate truism, and that is that all business success comes from the bottom up. All business failure comes from the top down. Now, I can give you an example of extending from my experience with the latest company. What happened was the product line that they had gotten by purchasing this small company, it had different requirements for the amount of capital that it required to do its job. Different from the mainline original product mix of the core corporation off in another part of the country. Well, their point of view was, well, that's the way we work. Why can't you do this? Well, it's a completely different industry that they bought into, and they didn't understand that they had done that. Then when this situation didn't work out, when essentially sales didn't come up to a particular multiplicand of costs, they said, well, the only way to fix that is to lay people off. What? Well, what kind of what kind of nearsighted, I don't want to tar Mr. Magoo, but it's really that kind of attitude. It's totally benighted that anyone can assume that everything that a huge corporation is going to do is going to fit into one particular formula. So they end up cutting the number of people they have working on the product. Okay, that slows down development. That throws a monkey wrench into support. You get those things going for you, and your sales are going to suffer even more. Okay, well, their sales suffer more. Okay, well, let's lay more people off. Okay, you're back in this whirlpool of self-destruction. And it has gotten to the point that not only did they lose the original product that I had written a large part of, but they started losing other parts that were more sellable to the American market. My product in particular was really selling in the Middle East because it was the first product that had full support for the reshaping that is required by right-to-left alphabets, that is, the ones used by Arabic, Urdu, and other Arabic-based scripts, and by Hebrew. Well, they just completely threw that product away. So now what's happened is that product is being bootlegged throughout the Middle East. The company, by its short-sightedness, failed to see that if it had put more money into the situation, it could have gotten over the hump and gotten into a product, a profitable and profitable and fulfilling. That's not quite the right word. They would have been able to expand their market presence and to have generated goodwill. Now, that is a phrase that you will not find in modern American mega business, because they don't care. They don't have to. They have all these financial instruments they can rely on.
They're the phone company. I mean, one of the things that concerns me that's been going on for the last 10-plus years is how we have basically exported all of our manufacturing jobs from this country. And so people are like, oh, well, they'll say, well, unemployment numbers are down, but they might be down, and I'm just using this in a very loose way, because someone who worked at they might have worked at a Ford factory or, Chrysler factory in Detroit now is flipping burgers at McDonald's because they can't get a job in their industry or in their field because there's no job to get because they've all been shipped overseas.
Right. That's the other side of merger mania and the other side of the failure of recognition of the value of goodwill. The problem with outsourcing is that it has several big problems. One is that it starts a corporation on the road of losing control of its core technology. It's transferring the knowledge that it needs in-house to do the things that it needs for product and services. By transferring it to a third party off somewhere, it is losing control over that particular part of its business. And it's not a good thing to do. Now, what happens if all of a sudden they have more opportunity in this field involving this product? The only thing they can do is pump more money overseas because they don't have the environment in which to start up this production again. The best example of this is the American shipbuilding industry. During the 1950s, the United States was the largest builder of ocean-going vessels. Slowly, that moved overseas because of various effects. Some of it labor, some of it other things. Part of it had to do with the fact that American businesses, this is going kind of out around things. American businesses had come out of World War II with this horrible concept that they were the best in the world because look how everybody was coming to them for products, and we're absolutely doing it right. Just look at this. Well, the problem was they had mistaken lack of competition with successful competition. Then as the war-torn nations from World War II and Korea and Vietnam now have bounced back, we have competition we have to deal with. American businesses have never faced competition. These big businesses, they have not faced competition, so they don't know how to deal with it. The only way they know how to deal with it is to line people up in court and start shooting lawyers at each other, because the only way they know how to deal with competition is to try to shut it down, not compete against it successfully, but just outright try to outlaw it. And that's the problem with intellectual property law, if you could see my air quotes. Intellectual property law is being used as a means for the big corporations, the ones who can afford the high-priced legal teams, to go through everything that they have on file, everything they can think of that might fit in, and throw some sort of patent, copyright, or whatever protection they can get on it to try to lock it down and lock out competition. The problem that generates is that it creates a sideline of business for those corporations. All of a sudden, they're not just in the business of making and selling things, but they're in the business of shooting down other companies with these legal challenges. And the other bad thing that's more important for the economy is that they can easily use their muscle to lock out small business. When you lock out small business, it's the same problem that we had with the fires, metaphorically, with the fires in Yellowstone, in that all the trees were old growth and there was nothing but clutter around under them. There were no intermediate age trees, no saplings, no trees coming up to replace them. And when the fires went through, it wiped out the forest and everything had to be started again, which is something that happened during the Depression, and if something isn't done, I'm afraid we might be heading for a bit of a problem.
Well, Ed, on that note, we have not quite 2 minutes left. So, I don't know where you want to go. Do you want to summarize? I mean, or do you want to talk about where people can get your book and your webpage and all that good stuff?
Well, let's talk about the webpage.
Okay, no.
The book's webpage is reachable by several URLs. One is www.communitycapitalism.us.com. Make sure the US is in there. Or you can type in www.vexedviking.com. The book is available from Amazon, and if you want to fire a rebuttal back at me, there's a contact sheet on the web page that you can use to get back to me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But don't, because he's really smart. And he'll, put commas in and correct your spelling and all important things like that. And you know I love you so much, don't you?
I hope so.
No, I wouldn't pick on you live on air. You know, I'm probably going to hear about this one later. Anyway.
You owe me coffee.
Okay, I can do that.
Okay.
And thanks for coming on the show.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me and letting me talk at no end.
Well, I'm good at that. Well, I mean, you have so much to say, and it's kind of like, and I feel like we barely even just covered one little part, and I feel like we jumped around and only covered a couple of little smatterings of what you have in your book.
It is a fairly thick 330 pages.
But it's very comprehensive, and even if you don't really understand about the economy and about the stock market, it really goes into depth as to what that all means, and I think that's cool for people like me who don't know.
Yeah.
All right. Ed, I need to let you go, and
all right.
I will talk to you soon.
All right, thank you.
All right. That was Eduard Qualls. His book is Community Capitalism. Next week, don't forget, we will be on the new network, Inception Radio Network, and we'll be interviewing Michael Tellender talking about the slave species of God. So till next week, I'm Dr. Rita Louise. This is Just Energy Radio. Be blessed.
Join host Dr. Rita Louise each week at this time for Just Energy Radio. Point your browser to www.justenergyradio.com for more show information and to contact Dr. Rita. Until next time, remember, it's all just energy.